Good day and welcome back from Washington, D.C. This is the second in a six-part webinar series the Africa Center for Strategic Studies is conducting on artificial intelligence strategy in the security domain. For those of you who may not have joined us yesterday, my name is Dr. Nate Allen. I am Associate Professor of Security Studies and the Africa Center for Strategic Studies faculty lead on cyber and emerging technologies issues. It is my pleasure to moderate today's programs. Today's webinar is entitled AI Amplified Security Threats. The main objective is to discuss and provide concrete examples of how AI is amplifying contemporary and potentially future security threats and challenges in Africa. For those of you who may not be familiar with ACSS, we were established in 1999 by Congress to serve as a forum for research and the exchange of ideas related to the study of security issues in Africa. We do so by expanding understanding through research and webinars such as this one, and by providing a trusted platform for dialogue and exchange to build enduring partnerships and catalyze strategic solutions to Africa's security challenges. For more information, please visit our website or the program's webpage, which was just linked by my colleague Dior in the chat, at africacenter.com. A reminder to all participants and panelists, this webinar is going to be a moderated discussion, Q&A discussion with the panelists, followed by a Q&A with the participants. Due to the number of participants, video and audio for audience members will remain disabled throughout. During the Q&A portion, please use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit written questions for our panelists. You may submit your question in your preferred language, and as moderator, I will convey as many questions to the panelists as my time will allow. This webinar is on the record. It is going to be recorded and used as a learning document under the programs page on our website. Again, that's the page that my colleague Dior just linked below. Finally, quick reminder, if you require any technical support, please just use the chat function and our staff will respond to your technical questions there. So let's begin. If there's one thing I hope that you took away from yesterday's webinar, for those of you who joined us, it's that AI is already very much present in Africa and having an impact. And today, I hope we can give you a more comprehensive understanding of specifically how artificial intelligence is affecting the kinds of threat and threat actors you worry about day to day. And I hope at least some of the examples may surprise and challenge you. AI has, for example, been used by cyber criminals to impersonate African leaders. It is being manipulated by violent extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab to spread hateful propaganda. The world's first use case of an AI-enabled autonomous weapon allegedly occurred on African soil when a Turkish-made drone in Libya may have used an AI image-driven recognition system to select and engage a target without the direct intervention of the operator of the drone. As AI spreads and becomes more sophisticated, these and other use cases will grow, and it is likely to become more and more integrated into the tools, techniques, and practices of the adversaries you face every day. And to help us unpack how AI is affecting Africa's threat landscape, we are delighted to have two very distinguished panelists with us today. I invite them to turn on their screens. Mr. Abdul Hakeem Ajijola, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you, a regular with ACSS, is the chair of the African Union Cybersecurity Expert Group. He is a leading professional in the cybersecurity industry and was ranked #1 on the 2020 IFSEC Global Cybersecurity Professional Influencers and Thought Leaders. He serves or has served on a number of multilateral bodies, including as commissioner at the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace and as a resource to the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs. We also have with us Mr. Akoh Baudouin, who is the National Security and Liaison Officer with the United Nations Development Program, where he advises the UNDP on leadership and critical security trends. His expertise includes small arms control, counterterrorism, and autonomous weapon systems, which he will speak to us about today. We have the honor of calling both of these distinguished individuals alumni, and we are really glad that you were able to join us today. So, Abdul Hakeem, we will begin with you. You joined us in a 2023 webinar we had on the security implications of AI. And during this webinar, you very aptly made the point that artificial intelligence is omnipresent. My question to you is, how is AI amplifying Africa's security challenges presently?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you, Dr. Allen, much appreciated. And thank you to the team at ACSS. Let me start with an African proverb that says, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And the AI-driven threats may appear invisible or distant to many, but I believe that their long-term impact on Africa's security, economy, and indeed sovereignty will be felt and acutely felt. Indeed, cyber criminals, may act relatively swiftly, and it seems at times nations that fail to strengthen their defenses will bear lasting scars. But to go directly to your question, Africa's security landscape, as we all know, is rapidly transforming. And with AI, it's actually a double-edged sword because it empowers security operations, but also it amplifies threats by empowering the bad actors. Cyber criminals, insurgents, and other hostile actors are leveraging AI to scale, to accelerate, and to refine their attacks, posing risks to economies, institutions, and indeed national security as a whole. A recent study released by Afripol has indicated that 80% of cyber attacks on African organizations involve some kind of malware, and this malware is enhanced by AI, the sophistication of the malware, the way its adaptability, and indeed the automation of the processes. And so cyber criminals are getting quite sophisticated and are creating self-learning, evasive, and highly targeted cyber attacks that are much harder to detect and mitigate. Another interesting stat from this Afripol survey was that 91% of attacks on individuals exploit AI-driven social engineering tactics. And you've mentioned, for example, Al-Shabaab are using it. Also, well over 2/3 of Africa's critical infrastructure has faced some kind of AI-powered cyber threat in 2023 alone. And so for all of us, I think these concerns over the last couple of years have nearly doubled as AI adoption accelerates. Other studies have indicated that many, in some cases up to 69% of major African companies do have security strategies, and 45%, and especially the banks, utilize some kind of AI-driven tools. But really, the question still remains, are our defenses evolving as fast as AI-powered threats? And I think many in the audience probably would answer that where our defenses are not evolving fast enough. Now, as I've indicated, AI is both a threat and in many cases the solution. And the challenge is that if we fail to act, we actually risk losing control of our digital, economic, and physical sovereignty. Now, we've seen AI attacks, and you've mentioned a couple, but just to drill down a little bit, we've seen AI automating phishing attacks, deepfake fraud, as you mentioned, heads of state have been impersonated, and indeed the delivery and exploitation of ransomware, so making these attacks much faster and more precise. We've also seen criminals leveraging AI-powered satellite imagery, for example, to optimize smuggling and illicit trafficking, including human trafficking, which unfortunately affects our women and youth in a greater number. A key takeaway here is that AI lowers the skill barrier for criminals or bad actors, enabling quite sophisticated or more sophisticated large-scale attacks. We've also seen across the continent AI-driven disinformation and political destabilization. We saw, for example, deepfakes that erode trust in institutions and indeed in democracy itself. In Nigeria, for example, during the 2023 elections, we saw and heard deepfake audio recordings falsely implicating various leaders, especially those in the opposition. But again, AI generally hyper targets misinformation. And so the takeaway here is that AI is accelerating political manipulation and social unrest, which can spiral very quickly beyond our control. A couple of other things. We are seeing AI being used to exploit critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. And indeed, well over 2/3 of Africa's operational technology systems have faced AI-driven threats in 2023 alone. And so these threats, attack the supervisory control and data acquisition, the SCADA systems of energy grids, our banking system, and indeed our national security infrastructure. And so a takeaway here also is that AI-driven cyber attacks could actually cripple national economies and essential services. We've also seen AI reshaping warfare, and you touched on the Cargo 2 drones in Libya back in March 2020. Many countries, including, for example, my own Nigeria, we are developing, our own AI-driven UAVs, Amebo, Gulma, Saigume, and we're using these to enhance our own counterterrorism operations. Having said that, at least 21 African nations are now employing AI-powered drones for surveillance, border security, and indeed, as you mentioned, combat. And so the takeaway here is that AI-driven warfare, whether we like it or not, is a reality. It offers strategic advantages, but also, as we've seen in some cases, escalates the risk. And then we've also seen AI-enabled financial crime. AfriPol, for example, estimates that African criminals are leveraging AI and to perpetrate business email compromises. And about $100 million is lost, well, often across Africa, but also in Europe and North America. And so AI is making financial crime more deceptive. It's automating it, and it's also making it very difficult to trace. And so I think that encapsulates, the thinking on this at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So kind of two themes I heard were sophistication and automation is what AI is essentially doing to a lot of threat actors across Africa. That makes sense. We heard yesterday, right? And quantity. Yeah, well, we heard yesterday that AI is essentially, modern AIs are very powerful pattern recognition tools. So it makes sense that they are essentially augmenting the ability of any agents, be they government, security sector, criminal groups, to be able to identify opportunities and take advantage of them at scale. That's a very, very, I think, profound and an important kind of key takeaway. Akoh, let's bring you in next, and I'd like you to drill down a little bit more deeply on how artificial intelligence is affecting the main threat actors in Africa. I understand you're going to be presenting on a topic like this in a couple of months. A lot of armed groups and criminal networks don't directly use the internet or don't have a ton of internet access, but I'd be curious, how do you see AIs influencing their capabilities, tools, techniques, and practices, maybe a little bit beyond the cyber domain?
Yes, greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And thank you to the ACSS team for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. It is indeed a privilege. Yes, in order for me to provide a comprehensive response to the above question, it is good to look at the strategic capabilities and tools that are being used by non-state armed groups and criminal gangs, criminal networks across Africa. And some of those strategic capabilities and tools include AI for warfare and also for surveillance. We see it very clearly, the use of AI by criminal gangs and non-state armed groups to attack and also destabilize lots of states. Hakeem mentioned the issue of Libya, whereby we saw the use of AI drones that were being used to conduct so many attacks. We also look at the issue of AI in propaganda and disinformation, whereby it is being used by so many armed groups across the continent to carry out disinformation and propaganda. And most especially, I think we can even make reference to the case in Cameroon, whereby we have a situation of the ongoing armed conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions, whereby some of the armed groups having their leaders in the diaspora are using AI-driven systems to, ensure that there is more interface, more interaction with the population and to influence public opinion across the board. We also have the issue of the use of AI. Hakeem also mentioned this point, the use of AI as far as illicit financing is concerned, and money laundering, whereby so many transactions have been hidden through the use of AI-driven systems. And we also discovered the use of Anonymous in South Africa to handle so many issues, whereby so many of the transactions by South African banks were being hidden. We also can make mention of the use of AI as far as the issue of arms trade is concerned, and the smuggling of drugs is also concerned, whereby so many of the border control agents are finding it very difficult to monitor so many criminal gangs across different countries, because they have more advanced systems. So in a nutshell, it's worthy of note that AI is a force multiplier, and it has greatly changed the level of the tactics that are being employed by both criminal gangs and non-state armed groups, because they are becoming more coordinated. They are conducting their activities in a much more professional fashion. And it's very important for us to mention the issue of autonomous weapon systems that so many of them are using at the moment. We have the issue of Al-Shabaab using autonomous weapon systems. We also have Boko Haram, which is also using that. It's having a lot of influence across the continent, and also in the northern part of Cameroon, where we experience that on a daily basis. So we can say AI is playing a major role as far as the capabilities and tools of both non-state armed groups and also criminal gangs is concerned. Thank you, and over to you.
So I think both of you have made out a very compelling case for how AI is an enabler of sophistication and autonomy. And let's already, maybe more so than a lot of the people who are joining us realize today, AI is or may be in something like a drone system that is using AI-driven image recognition to kind of pick out various aspects of the terrain, maybe phases, maybe people. We know that it might have been used to target a weapon in Libya. We know that it's being used as to target weapon systems elsewhere in the world. And it's not a stretch to believe this kind of capability is, if not there already, making its way into kind of commercial, off-the-shelf tactical drone systems that are already being used in armed conflict all over the continent. So, Abdul, Hakeem, let's bring you in. Where is all this going? I mean, I know there are a lot of unknowns about exactly how AI is going to evolve and what implications it's going to have. But I'd like you to do your best to pick up your crystal ball for us and give it a try. How do you see AI affecting Africa's security landscape in the future? as adoption continues to pick up and it becomes more sophisticated?
First and foremost, I think AI-driven threats, unfortunately, will evolve faster than our defenses. We're seeing AI enabling self-learning cyber attacks that evade detection and exploit new vulnerabilities. We're seeing the rise of cyber warfare, AI-powered espionage, deepfake manipulation, and these will become more unpredictable and widespread. And so the strategic imperative is that Africa must integrate AI into security doctrines and invest in proactive AI-powered defense mechanisms. Interestingly, we see the evolution of less costly AI platforms, which arguably we should explore with a view to leveraging. Number two, AI will expand the reach of asymmetric warfare. We've all said AI-powered drones provide insurgents and criminals with real-time reconnaissance and automated strikes. AI enables remote financial systems disruption, crippling our economies with minimal resources. So that's part of the asymmetry. And so we've also seen how AI propaganda can radicalize population and actually destabilize government. So I think there's a tendency for this to get worse before it gets better. And so here too, the strategic imperative is that governments must modernize counterterrorism strategies, integrating AI surveillance, drone defense systems, and increase their cyber resilience. Three, I would say that unfortunately also we run the risk of AI becoming a tool for state power, for better or worse. AI-driven facial recognition and predictive policing can enhance security, and that's an argument that is used, but it also risks mass surveillance, and you could end up with significant political repression. I was just talking about the strategic imperative that Africa must develop robust AI governance as opposed to just government, but AI governance frameworks that balance the security needs with human rights and other related protections. Unfortunately, also, AI will drive foreign influence and also digital dependence. We've seen Africa's reliance on foreign AI technologies that do expose us to espionage, economic surveillance, and cyber manipulation. Unfortunately, also, one sees that AI-enabled disinformation will likely undermine the nascent democracies that we are trying to nurture and foster. AI, as we all know, automates propaganda. We've seen it, we believe, influencing elections and certainly manipulating public opinion. We've also seen where deepfakes blur the line between truth and deception, creating long-term distrust and instability. A child who does not travel thinks his mother is the best cook. And the analogy here is that many African nations still underestimate the scale and sophistication of AI-driven threats. And so if we only look inward and react passively, we risk remaining vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that is quite a compelling list of threats and potential future evolutions of AI, and already kind of a bit of a laundry list of what our African colleagues can do to maybe prepare for it. So let's go back to you, Akoh. How, in your view, can security forces across Africa stay a little bit ahead, or try to stay a little bit ahead of what are a very rapidly evolving series of threats? And how can they anticipate and respond to the employment of AI by their adversaries?
Yes, thank you, Nat. It's going to be a very big challenge looking at the current state of affairs. And I think from a point of view, a personal point of view, there is need for African security forces to first of all understand the threat landscape, because without a proper understanding of the threat landscape, it becomes very difficult for policies to be put in place to address the issue of the use of AI by their adversaries. Understanding the threat landscape means, African security forces must understand the use of AI in warfare and security threats, because some of the African security forces are becoming obsolete because of their inability to respond to modern threats, modern security threats at the moment. And once the threat landscape has been properly established or properly understood by African security forces, the next strategy is to have both proactive and adaptive approaches such that they can respond effectively to the use of AI by their adversaries. And one of the first proactive and also an approach that is very important for African security forces is that of counter-propaganda initiatives. We all know about the use of GIVES CT, that is the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, which is a network of the tech giants, Google, Twitter, and also Microsoft. So making use of this by African security forces can be very important to stay ahead. We also have the issue of moonshot CVE, that is moonshot counterterrorism, countering violent extremism systems, which uses data analytics. So they can also tap into this as a means of countering propaganda initiatives that are being conducted by those that are already moving ahead in the area of AI. Secondly, African security forces, in order to make a move, can also look at the issue of predictive surveillance systems in order to ensure that they can analyze passenger data information and respond through preemptive measures before it becomes too late for them. We also have the use of advanced passenger information, which can be very useful through the use of AI-driven systems. Thirdly, as one of the approaches, the proactive approaches, African security forces can also take a look at studies that have been conducted in Nigeria on AI-powered surveillance against Boko Haram, which has been very effective up to this moment. And I think there are other studies that are ongoing on this issue. Thirdly, Hakeem mentioned, and we mentioned in the first response, the issue of money laundering. And in order for us to ensure that African state security forces are a step further, they have to look into putting in place financial monitoring systems, which will help in tracking transactions and also fighting against money laundering schemes across the continent. And a good example is the study that was conducted in South Africa on AI's defense against cybercrime, which was very important in using cybersecurity tools to monitor and detect abnormal transactions. We also have the issue of AI-based deepfakes that are also being used by those that are moving ahead, some of the adversaries. So in order for the state security forces to be a step ahead, they have to also ensure that they have AI-based deepfakes detection facilities that can be very useful at the national level and also at the regional level. In addition to that, we can also look at the issue of capacity building and collaboration, because a coordinated approach through collaboration can help African state security forces through the issue of AI literacy and cyber warfare capacity building activities, and also the issue of both bilateral and multilateral partnerships, such as that which is being done by the AU-led cybersecurity initiatives and also Interpol. So all of this is very important to ensure that African state security forces can be a step ahead. And in addition, we can also look at policy and recommendations, such as having policies that are in line with the proper use of AI in the military domain. We know this is extremely challenging because states have different realities as far as security threats are concerned. But there is need for more engagement in order to develop policies that can address both national, regional, and international challenges. So I think those are some of the examples or some of the outlook that I can present. And we can also see in the Sahel, we see the Malian, government, the Malian security forces, they are making use of predictive analytics in conducting attacks against some of the groups across the Sahel, and it's really helping to move them forward. So I think the issue of policy is very important, because with the coordinated policy, such as the Rwanda National AI Policy and Ghana's Counter Cybersecurity Act that was enacted in 2020, I think African state security forces can address so many of the challenges that they're having at the moment. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. That was very, very comprehensive, from highlighting how AI, African security forces need to look into adopting AI as a tool, to needing to enhance regional collaboration, to ensuring that AI, and this is something we heard yesterday, to ensuring that AI systems are, based on sound data and used as intended, and in line with sound principles. The final word we're going to have go to you, Abdul Hakeem. You work a lot at the regional level. You live and breathe kind of Africa's information technology and security challenges. So what does Africa as a region you think need to do to prepare for a world of AI-enabled threats?
Well, there are a number of things, but I think Akoh has mentioned some of the key underlying thing. We do need to empower our systems, our services, our institutions to be a step ahead. So proactivity, I think, is key. That said, I believe Africa must transition from being a passive consumer of AI to an active leader in AI-driven and ethical AI-driven security development. So there are a number of steps I think we need to explore. Number one is that we need to develop and implement AI-centric security strategies. Starting, of course, with the AU and the other regional bodies, they must lead in AI policy harmonization. I'm pleased to note that I think at the AU level, that process has begun. But the governments themselves, the national jurisdictions, must draft and enforce AI-focused cybersecurity laws. National AI cybersecurity or AI security task forces must be established. And I think around this, there are some actionable steps: establish AI-specific cybersecurity frameworks, launch national AI security task forces, and promote African-led AI governance. Number two, we need to build AI-driven defense and digital forensics. We need to deploy AI-powered threat intelligence platforms, invest in digital forensics labs to counter AI-driven cybercrime. And here, the actionable steps would be train law enforcement and national security operatives in AI-driven forensics, and also create a Pan-African AI security alliance for intelligence sharing. Number three, I think we need to strengthen AI regulation and ethical governance. We need to balance AI security needs with civil liberties, as I've mentioned earlier. We also need to regulate AI-powered disinformation, surveillance, and cybersecurity abuses. And I think around this, some of the action steps could include create AI governance committees within security agencies, mandate transparency in AI surveillance and law enforcement, and general AI use. And also, number four, we need to invest in our talent, in our people. We need to invest in producing qualitative AI talent and research for security applications. so that we're not just taking or importing, without question, solutions from other climes or jurisdictions. To do this, I think we need to train cybersecurity professionals, AI engineers, and intelligence analysts. Again, even the whole nature of intelligence has moved from the traditional cycle, much to a much more proactive perspective. And certainly, this requires funding of AI research focused on cyber resilience. And so the action steps here, I would say, are to launch AI-focused cybersecurity training academies across the continent, partner with African universities and the private sector for AI security-related research and development. Number 5, I think we need to foster regional and international AI security cooperation. Certainly, organizations like the African Union, groups like ECOWAS, SADC, and others, IGAD, must, I think, establish AI-specific security agreements. And Africa must engage with the global AI security organizations that are coming up. And so related to this, the key actionable steps are to create, continental AI threat intelligence network, negotiate AI-specific security agreements while ensuring Africa's digital sovereignty. And again, we have to be very alert. We have to be very cognizant that everybody has their own interests, and it's imperative that we promote, African interests. The bottom line here really is that Africa, I think, needs to lead. Africa must lead, not necessarily follow. And I'll save some other thoughts for any conclusions that may come up. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now turn to the question and answer period. So first question, and I think, Baudouin, you alluded to some of these. Are there any examples of militaries in Africa already having some kind of policy framework for artificial intelligence, either in a defense manual or a defense policy? Second, I think there's a hunger for each of you to provide maybe a little bit more kind of concrete examples of how AI can directly be applied, like what kind of systems are being used in border surveillance or countering disinformation? How can they work? Is it even possible, for example, to think about using AI to directly kind of craft narratives and do counter propaganda? So I think some folks interested in a little bit more understanding AI at more of a tactical and operational level, if either of you are willing to do that. And then finally, I think this is a very critical question, one we heard yesterday as well. How can African countries expect to develop their own systems when they are currently kind of behind advanced ones in terms of their ability to kind of create and have a technical expertise and what have you? I think one statistic from yesterday that really jumped out at me is that the African continent has something like 0.5% of the world's AI researchers. So given those power imbalances, how can African countries even start to kind of adopt and generate their own, or A, generate their own AI models, or B, at the very least, kind of adopt and use AI models in ways that are suitable to their particular countries or regions, circumstances, and contexts? Akoh, let's start with you.
Yeah, for the questions. I think looking at the first question on the use of AI by African security forces, I already mentioned the aspect of Mali, which is using predictive analytics to anticipate and prevent attacks. And there are other examples like the situation in Niger, where the Nigerian state security forces is also working in collaboration with international partners to ensure that they deploy AI-based surveillance systems to monitor and also disrupt activities across the Sahel of non-state armed groups and criminal gangs. We also have the example of Burkina Faso, which has also adopted AI-driven financial tracking systems to analyze communication and financial transactions linked with extremist groups across the Sahel. So those are a few examples of some of the African states, mostly focused on Sahelian states that are making use of AI to counter terrorist activities across both within and at the regional level. So, but we also have African states like, for example, in the case in Cameroon, where the state security forces is creating more awareness and more capacity building of officers as far as AI literacy is concerned. And even though it's still at its infancy, but it's progressing positively moving forward. So thank you, and over to you.
Thanks. Abdul Hakeem?
Very quickly, in Nigeria, I mentioned the Nigerian Air Force has at least 3 drone models. And one of the things they do is that the drones fly over, for example, a given area where, for example, you may have bandits in the northwest or insurgents in the northeast, for example. And these bad actors use motorcycles. And basically, the AI can tell whether, a pack of or a gang or a horde of people on motorcycles have passed through a particular area, quote unquote, in the bush. And so it's able to see the disruption in the environment to be able to determine what quantity of people have passed, what direction they are going in, and that gives and basically all of that is processed through AI to make predictions on where they're going and possibly what they want to do. We've also seen law enforcement in South Africa basically have AI systems that track with cameras that track number plates. Again, South Africa has had some challenges with robberies and carjackings, and so these help law enforcement to be able to interdict and nip these kind of crimes in the bud. But I think to the larger answer, we must appreciate that yes, we have to have priorities, but these things are journeys. They are not necessarily destinations, and so we have to look at our aspirations and our processes as a journey. We work towards them, and I'll just end with a quote from Nelson Mandela. I think he famously said, "It seems impossible until it is done." And so I think that applies here. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. I just have one thing to add, because this is sort of an active line of effort here at ACSS. From what I'm aware of, I don't think there's any country yet in Africa that publicly has, and please correct me if I'm wrong, has any AI as part of their military or security strategy or doctrine. There may be a couple of national AI strategies that have some limited responsibilities kind of assigned to the security sector, but kind of where we're at is that AI is so new in security systems that people are still, even AI leaders are still not entirely sure of all of its strategic applications. And amidst the uncertainty, there's kind of, I think, a lot of secrecy right now. I think a lot of countries are sort of in a test and find out and try to figure out what it's being used to do, and then the policy is gonna come after, which I think can be problematic if you get yourself into kind of uses where you didn't intend, or where you kill civilians in ways you didn't intend, or where you get the potential for kind of escalation through misunderstandings, or where you become reliant on a system that is expensive and not necessarily suited to your particular needs. But what I think is really evident right now, and as you heard all of the examples from Mali with predictive analytics, to Nigeria with looking at motorcycles, to South Africa looking at license plate leaders, AI, I think more than a lot of people realize is actively being used, especially for ISR purposes, by security forces all over the continent. And we're at a place now where I think it's imperative that people who are thinking at the policy and strategy level kind of catch up, right? I mean, it can't just remain, I think, in the operational and tactical domain forever. And we're starting to better, and as we start to better understand these use cases, their strengths, their weaknesses, I think the policy is going to get there. Next series of questions. So we have a couple of questions from Eric Musafiri from DRC. He asked, what would be the contribution of local organizations and young people to strengthen this AI-based security system? I think kind of an implicit part of that question is, how can we ensure that AI security systems are maybe trust-based or kind of don't alienate the same kinds of populations that I think they're being used to survey? A second and related question, and I think a very important one that we alluded to yesterday, is what's the cost-benefit analysis, right? At what point does it become beneficial to acquire an AI system? Or, like we discussed yesterday, some of them have very large data requirements. Some of them are not easy to acquire. I always think about, if I'm waging a war against an insurgent group, for example, would I prefer human or AI driven intelligence? I think in most cases, I'd probably prefer human driven intelligence, because it shows that I have some presence and some degree of understanding of the local political economy. So how can African security forces kind of square that circle? And then finally, I think this question of we have a question from Hossam from Egypt about how general AI how AI can or cannot kind of be effective in detecting propaganda and hate speech on social media used by non-state actors to weaken nations, while also accounting for the cultural and political diversity of each country. I think that's a very important question. I think we've seen, particularly in places like Al-Shabaab in Somalia, that actually armed groups be very effective in using various tools and techniques and evading AI-driven sensors. So is this a war that's winnable or not? Abdul, Hakeem, let's start with you, and then we'll go back to Akoh.
Well, first and foremost, in terms of involving, local people and especially our young people, they are actually the key resource. I think we underestimate for example, the quantum of data generated by just people. But having said that, in terms of the applications of AI in national security situations, of course, AI has to be domesticated. And I think this is part of the challenge we've had very broadly with technology. We've not, and this is at the policy level now, I think we've not always thought through how best to domesticate. Because at the end of the day, if you don't domesticate the technology, if you don't involve local perspectives, if you don't involve the population that has the energy to drive these processes forward, one would argue as a society, you're probably not going to go anywhere very, very quickly. In terms of cost analysis, I think this is very crucial, but also what is cost? Because many of us would also argue that cost is money, we agree, but cost is also your dependency. When you have a system provided to you by a foreign government, as they say, there are no permanent friends, there are only permanent interests. Not a foreign government, but a foreign company, but the governments that they answer to can turn around and tell that company, for whatever reasons, please switch off that system remotely, or please, poison the data, or please, make it more difficult for that system to be used. So I think it's very imperative. It's part of that domestication notion that we do need to invest in building our own, whether it is nationally or preferably Africa-wide, because again, there are some things that can be shared. Of course, there are limits to the sharing. And then also in terms of the influence operations on our people generally. First of all, people all over the world are victims of influence operations. So it's not necessarily an Africa problem. But I think even at the global level, a critical component is, does our education system actually teach or imbibe critical thinking? And so it's actually at that kind of foundational level that we need to be able to invest as society. So it's much bigger than simply just taking a fistful of dollars, as they say, and purchasing some system from somewhere. There are some fundamentals of the society we do need to address, and address very quickly, because AI is not only shaping or reshaping the military domain, it's actually reshaping life. Thank you.
Thanks. Akoh, over to you.
Yes, Nat, thank you. Thank you. I think looking at the first question on AI and African youths, I wish to go back to the issue of policy. African states must ensure that the policies that have been enacted are policies that are extremely important for the youths. As Hakeem mentioned, the youths are the future. And African youths, as we can see from statistics, it's moving, the growth is very, very high. The youthful population in Africa is very high, which means the workforce is there, and African economies have the potential of moving very, very fast. So policies that are to be developed by African states must not just be national policies. We also need to have regional policies. I think there are some regional policies that are in place, but they are not enough, because the issue of the responsible use of AI, is not embedded in most of the policies that have been put in place by African states. We know that the level of unemployment as far as youths are concerned across the continent is also very high. So policies that are focused on entrepreneurship and innovation will be extremely important, because it's going to show that the use of AI can lead to economic growth across small businesses, whereby we have so many youths are engaged, both graduates and those from the informal sector, as far as vocational training is concerned. There is need to integrate the positive use of AI for businesses, small businesses, and also entrepreneurship across the board. So for my part, I think that is a big responsibility, both at the level of the AU, to look into it, that the issue of economic growth is closely linked to AI as far as youth are concerned, and to see how capacity building can be developed across different states on reassuring or creating more awareness on this issue. And the second question was that of a cost analysis of AI. I think, as mentioned, by Hakeem, AI is to be domesticated, and by so doing, we are going to realize that it is not just an aspect that is beneficial to Western countries, but it's also something that can be used by African states and the local population to ensure that there is economic growth, and there is also the issue of positive social impact across the board. So briefly, I think that is it from my end. Thank you, and over to you.
Thanks to both of you. We have quite a few more questions coming in. One from the Dag Hammarskjöld Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies at the Kapelle University in Zambia, which is, we talked a lot about how AI is being used to try to directly engage in conflict or address conflict. But how can AI be used for conflict resolution or peace promotion? I think that's a really, really great question. Second, we have, following, this is just, I'll just phrase the question because it's really well phrased. Following on the panelist emphasis on the importance on Africa to becoming a leader in AI use, especially in the security domain, what are your recommendations for African states and regional organizations, such as the AU, to support the creation of an indigenous solution and to empower relevant stakeholders within industry and academia to create and adopt, I guess, their own kind of African-generated AI systems? And kind of more concretely, we have a question on How costly is AI-driven technology to acquire? How can you acquire it? Maybe both of you can cite the examples that you're aware of from Nigeria and Cameroon, but I think we have some folks in the audience trying to get a concrete sense of like what types of systems are available, who they might work with, and what exactly the costs are that are involved. I think it's a little bit of a vague question. I think probably the cost can vary depending on how exactly they're using it and for what. But I'd be curious for your perspective. So Abdul, Hakeem, let's start with you.
Actually, the question on AI for conflict resolution, I think is actually a very, very pertinent and important, very timely question. First of all, AI needs to be used to neutralize the activities of bad actors. So if AI can be used to more promptly detect not only the disinformation, but also how it spreads, how it diffuses, so that you can go to the various sources and at least identify those. I think that exposing those things, that transparency increases, or improves the environment for discussion and negotiation and towards conflict resolution. Now, building on that, one of the key things I think AI does is that it can empower negotiators or even empower various parties to see the perspectives of, their opposite numbers, so to speak. Because there are many times that you can actually, AI can help you do the background research for you to understand where, the person sitting across from you is coming from. Maybe it's some statistical information, maybe it's historical information, maybe it shows that they are going through some circumstances that you or your group may not even tolerate yourself. So I think it's possible to leverage AI to see the other party's perspective in order to gain empathy, which I think helps a very simple thing is how much water does somebody in an insurgent community use versus somebody in, for example, a comfortable capital. I didn't quite follow the question on the African Union, but I think at the end of the day, AI needs to be a collaborative effort. It's like cybersecurity. It's too big. It's too complex. It's too fast for a single entity. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have national interest. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have jurisdiction. Certainly you must. But as we've seen, many of these, the challenges themselves are multi-jurisdictional. Akoh mentioned about bad actors in the Sahel leveraging AI. Again, they can move across borders. The disinformation moves across borders. So clearly, in our response mechanisms must also similarly be able to diffuse and move across borders. When you speak about the costs, I just want to emphasize, yes, AI costs millions of dollars. I mean, it's not a cheap platform. They're not cheap technologies. Militarized drones themselves, are not cheap. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, there are much cheaper drones that now can cooperate and work in swarms. Those are in the order of the 5s and 10s and $15,000, $20,000. But when you're talking about a swarm of 100 drones, then those costs pile up. But I think we should also look at the cost beyond money. Failure to act, failure to invest. What are the costs of not taking action? An escalation in AI-powered cybercrime, disinformation, economic espionage. Another cost is foreign dominance over Africa's digital security landscape. And the third cost is weakened national sovereignty due to AI-enhanced cyber warfare. So I think we should look at costs, not necessarily just money. Thank you.
Thank you. Akoh, anything to add?
Thank you. I think with respect to the first question on the issue of conflict resolution, AI and conflict resolution, I wish to mention that we have huge, at times, let's say, for example, we have the ongoing armed conflict in the northwest and southwest region of Cameroon of a population of close to 8 million people, whereby you have so many views that are being expressed on social media as far as the conflict is concerned. And we also have other conflicts across the continent. So with respect to the use of AI in conflict resolution, I think we have the issue of automated systems that can be used by the population to provide information on, a more structured approach can be very useful to those on the negotiating table, whereby this huge data can be further analyzed, and it can provide a lot of information to those who are involved in negotiations or discussions of ongoing conflicts across the continent. So a more structured approach to gather data is very important. We also have the issue of, having the issue of historic issues, perspectives. I think it was also mentioned by Hakeem, but we have AI systems that can give a historical perspective as far as many conflicts are concerned, with data that is available for decision making. So I think briefly that is what I have to add on that. And also to conclude the issue of cost, as far as AI is concerned, it's not just in terms of financial cost. Cost can also be looked at in terms of human resource cost. That can also be very, very useful. And human resource cost comes with a lot of capacity building on AI systems. Thank you, and over to you.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think when we heard that yesterday, that even when you're using kind of something that's relatively cheap, like you're using ChatGPT to do translation, or create a story, or Google Translate, there almost always is a human labor cost involved in both using and training someone to use an AI system. So that also has to be taken into account. I'm actually going to ask one question that's come up repeatedly, that I'm not sure I've heard either of you answer, and that's relating to the fact that up till present, Africa leads and doesn't really follow in AI. That a lot of the AI that is used on the continent is mostly consuming kind of algorithms or technologies or systems that have been constructed abroad. And even we heard this even yesterday too, where even in the industry itself, there's a lot of brain drain, where you have people who may be educated in AI use in Africa, but then are using their skills to kind of inform the development of AI in other parts of the world. So how can countries manage that? Like, are most African countries going to be kind of stuck using stuff that AI systems that are provided by the West or the East? What kind of opportunities might they have to create and adopt their own AI, given both the skill, these kind of really, really, I think, substantial and challenging skill, resource, and power gaps? I have my own thoughts, but let's start with you, Abdul Hakeem.
Okay, sorry, you were breaking up, but if I understand, it's about the human resource component. Did I get you right?
No, it's how do African governments manage the fact that like most of the AI they use is not generated from within Africa, and most of the expertise and skill and models that are being developed abroad. Like, given sort of the inequalities in the current kind of global AI ecosystem, how can African countries even begin to kind of think about kind of developing their own AI, and how do they manage how do they manage AI adoption from external?
I think there's a phrase, is it from the Bible? As you sow, so shall you reap. You got to invest. I think Africa needs to make some decisions. Will Africa lead, or will it be led? And in order to, how would I say it? You have to invest. That's the bottom line. Because if you don't take these actions, we need to ensure, for example, that Africa can defend against AI-driven threats. I would argue that we have the opportunity to position Africa as a global leader. And dare I say it, prior to DeepSeek, many people would have told you that there are no quote unquote cheap solutions. And of course, $6 million for Africa is a lot of money to invest. But when you think of the kinds of investments some of our leadership make in aircraft and retinue, the kind of investments our political class makes, one would argue that we could probably, if we really, really wanted to squeeze out, the requisite resources, because at the end of the day, it's in our collective interest in Africa to protect our national security, to protect our economic stability, and certainly to protect our democratic or processes that keep society stable, keep society comfortable, keeps us people are able to do to live the kind of qualitative life that we would expect. So yes, there are other challenges, but I would argue that sometimes technology can help you to what's the word? Also deal with those challenges. And just a final note: there are Africans dying today crossing the Sahara Desert. There are Africans dying today crossing the Mediterranean, and those that are quote unquote successful become an unwanted underclass, for example, in Europe or North America. We can use these technologies, including AI, leverage them so that our young people can actually stay at home. And when I say home, I'm not even talking of the city, I'm talking of the village, so that they can work and earn foreign exchange, but spend local currencies. And so I think our leadership needs to be able to evaluate some of these things. And so at the end of the day, when you invest in AI, and I think Akoh put this very well, you are not simply investing in a tool or the other, you have to invest in people. And once you have an empowered people, especially with the kind of knowledge needed in this age, and probably in the near future, I think everybody, including the leaders, are going to be much better off for it. And indeed, including our international partners. Thank you.
Thanks. Akoh, anything to add?
Yes, Hakeem. Thank you very much, Hakeem, for that wonderful input. I think in addition, I think Hakeem has really mentioned so many aspects. In addition to that, I wish to also highlight that in addition to investments by African governments, there must first of all be the will, because we realize that there is a lot of wasteful spending across so many African governments. And we know Africa is very rich in natural resources. So if African states can look at, because the question is creating AI systems that are Afrocentric, or that are coming from the local level. We know there are so many youths out there that are very, very talented, very educated, but they lack the will from their national governments or maybe regional policies that can also help to empower them as far as developing these systems are concerned. Hakeem made mention of DeepSeek, which nobody knew that we could DeepSeek could be AI systems can be created with just $6 million or so. So it's just about the will. Once the will is there, then it's possible for AI system to be generated within the continent. And some of these governments, African governments, can also go into negotiations with the Western communities or most of the stakeholders who are based in the West to see how they can establish an understanding of exploring natural resources in exchange for, bringing into the continent some of these AI-driven technologies and educating the youth about that. Thank you, and over to you.
Thanks. So I'd just like to come in here also to give my perspective on the cost question, because it comes up in cybersecurity as well. So first, I think we have to distinguish between buying AI and buying systems with AI in them. And for the security sector and security sector actors, almost always it's going to be the latter. you're going to be buying a a military drone with an AI image recognition capability. You might be driving a tactical drone that has swarming capability with AI baked in. So you're not buying the AI, you're buying the system. And I think as Abdul, Hakeem, and Akoh made, those systems have lots of different price points. Um, and, you know, I do think one of the interesting things about where I think there's a potential comparative advantage for a lot of African countries is um, we live in an age of, on the one hand, some types of technology is really, really expensive to produce, and you have essentially monopolies or oligopolies producing them. On the other hand, a lot of the technology they do produce, think of a chat GPT, think of a commercial drone, think of a um, think of a language translation capability like you get through Google Translate. They're very easy to use. They're very well suited to be adapted to kind of a local context. All they require is some degree of adaptation and ingenuity. This is especially true in the commercial drone market, where we're already seeing countries of all kinds take existing commercial drones and refigure them in ways that kind of more suit whatever their particular kind of tactical and operational purpose is. So I think, I think on the one hand, I think everybody needs to be realistic that African countries are not in a position to be able to compete with big tech or kind of Chinese in terms of being a global supplier for a lot of really sophisticated technologies anytime soon. But they are and can be innovators, I think, in applying and adopting them and potentially producing them. And I think, as Abdul Hakeem pointed to, a lot of it's not so much the technology, but the ingenuity behind the creation. So I think if there's one thing that you invest in, it's education. It's in people. It's in getting people to the point where they understand and are able to use these systems. And of course, I was gonna there was a point in the chat made about this directly as I made this point. And that was gonna be my last point, which is that of course, in order to be able to use any kind of digital system, requires basic power and interconnectivity, right? So for 2/3 of your population now, this is going to change. I think it's going to be in 20 or 30 years. It's going to be most of the continent. Yeah, you need to get those basic investments in digital infrastructure done and digital literacy before you I think about doing a lot in terms of training your people. But yes, absolutely, that is foundational. Okay, so we have time, I think, for one more round of questions before we conclude. So I'm going to ask two because we're running relatively low on time. So one is from Jerdi Abdul Ghaffur. What do you guys see as some of the promising areas of AI research and development that could help shape the future of Africa that maybe African government and security sector actors can use and apply? And second, how do we ensure AI sustainability and minimize its risks? How do we ensure that AI is accepted by indigenous peace builders and indigenous systems in Africa? That's from Crispin Coupiel. Let's start with you, Abdul Hakeem, and we'll end with Baudouin Akoh, and maybe I think also as you conclude, it would be a good time for any kind of concluding remarks you might have.
Okay. Well, I think there are a number of AI research and development initiatives across the continent. I'm aware of some that, for example, for military application, where they are using or they are trying to enhance the systems so that they can use relatively low-cost cameras for surveillance. So that AI helps to basically up the quality of the data generated by those cameras, so that you don't necessarily have to invest in the most expensive cameras, in order to get the same quality of result that allows you to now further process and arrive at some decisions. One very interesting research project that I came across was a professor in the University of Ibadan. And what they were doing was to try and get, for example, if you have a mechanic who's trying to fix something, there's an apprenticeship system. And of course, English is not the strong point. But you want to be able to get, for example, a lead mechanic in Ibadan who speaks Yoruba, for example, language, and the person he's tutoring is in, let's say, for example, Enugu and speaks Igbo. And so basically, he can say, look, this is a wrench, this is where you put it, this is how you turn it, and then the AI automatically translates. And these are the kind of systems that you can see subsequent applications where, for example, troops who are going into an area where they may not necessarily speak the language can have real-time interpretation in African languages. So that's one. In terms of AI sustainability, I think the bottom line is that it comes down to the value proposition. What is the value proposition of the AI solution? If the AI solution is able to, for example, support improved rural health without necessarily having doctors go there, then people will see the value and I think be more willing to adopt it. If military strategists see the value proposition of having, being able to better filter or being able to even analyze their intelligence to enable them to be more proactive. Because again, I think many of us would argue that the modern military, it's not simply about the brute force anymore. It's also about the smarts that your officers bring to bear in the field. And let me just conclude with an African proverb that says, only a fool tests the depth of a river with both feet. And here, AI is not a distant risk. It is an active crisis, in the opinion of many of us. And I think if Africa hesitates or conversely moves recklessly, I think we risk being swept away by AI-driven cyber warfare, economic exploitation, and unfortunately, political destabilization. So I think the choice is very clear for us as Africans. We either step forward with strategy and strength, or we are going to be consumed by inaction. It's our choice. Thank you.
Thanks. Akoh, any final thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I think looking at promising areas of research, I wish to look at it from the Afrocentric point of view, where we realize that most of the African population is living in rural areas. And the issue of AI in healthcare is extremely important, especially we have the issue of pregnant women, who are dying, because of poor healthcare. So the area of research in AI, as far as healthcare provision across rural communities is concerned, is extremely important. I think Hakeem also briefly mentioned that, because if we develop systems that can address the African problem, I think this is also going to help to create jobs and also save lives across the rural population, most especially. Secondly, on the issue of sustainability, I think having a system that can be used, to transform lives, I think is very, very important, because we do, at the level of the continent, we do adopt systems that are of no use. We use those systems, just for fun, just to browse and so on and so forth. But for it to actually have concrete impact across most of the rural communities, it cannot be seen. And lifting the population out of poverty, it's very important for us to have those kind of systems, because they can be sustainable. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very, very much to both of you. Just kind of a couple of key takeaways before we wrap things up. So one of the things that I took away from this webinar is that we're kind of in a era where artificial intelligence is being rapidly adopted and used by threat actors all across the continent. Even if this might not be super widely recognized, it is, being used to conduct cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. It is being used by extremist groups to supercharge their propaganda efforts. It is being used to kind of look at various areas to survey and target, and it is increasingly being adopted into remote warfare, armed drones of various kinds. And I think we see right now, we live in an age where I think warfare is becoming increasingly automated, and both states and non-state armed groups and criminal actors are actively embracing this automation in new, unpredictable, very challenging ways. And so I think, yeah, the choice is, as Abdul Hakeem put it, either to adapt or be left behind. And um, unfortunately, I think the strategists and the policymakers are still very much behind the operators and tacticians, both in states and in non-state armed actors who are actively employing AI. So I think it is definitely incumbent upon African governments and global community to start or further discussions about how to manage AI systems at a strategy and policy level. I heard kind of various comments in the chat that there is hunger among some colleagues for more strategic guidance and education. Feel free to get in touch if you're interested. That is also an area that we've been pursuing at the Africa Center. I think part of it requires having some baseline level understanding of exactly how AI is being employed in Africa and for what purposes, which is exactly the kind of conversations we're trying to and evidence we're trying to build with this webinar series. So if you liked what you heard today, I would encourage you and your friends to show up to the 4 additional webinars we're going to have over the course of the next couple of months. So the next 2 webinars we're doing are going to be March 13th and 14th, precisely on AI strategy and policy development, thinking about good practices, both that are emerging in AI strategy, but also in kind of what ACSS has done in national security strategy and where maybe the synergies between those 2 approaches might lie. And then also thinking more specifically, today we looked mostly from the perspective of how threats and threat actors are adopting AI. We're also going to kind of understand, I'll try to understand a little bit more how African governments and security forces are adopting AI. And then we're going to conclude towards the end of in early April with panels on managing AI risk and the international implications. But thank you very, very much, Abdul Hakeem. Thank you very, very much, Akoh, for your extremely enlightening, thoughtful remarks and for a great session. We look forward to continuing the conversation in the future and in the coming months. And until then, everyone have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world.